Let's get started. Thank you for joining us on March 26th. We're almost to April, right in the middle of testing. Good things are happening. We just got through the fall 2 submission for CalPads. That was big time. So our DAAN meeting, I brought a partial DAAN team here. We're a little bit shorthanded right now. So I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for accountability and data literacy. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Hillary Weissman. We'll be manning the chat today. I call her DJ Dr. W. And then Jeremy Dim, who's our data processing specialist, and Criterion, who's our, I think you got to bring it down a little bit. Criterion, who is our unit secretary. She's still out on maternity leave. So we're adjusting the mic here for you all online. Sorry about that. So she'll be back soon. Now, also, Stephen Bartlett, he's a lone wolf right now in the assessment unit. Hopefully, we'll have his other position filled in assessment pretty soon. And Diane Martin, who's the unit secretary, was here a little bit earlier. So that's our team. Like I said, we're a little short-staffed, so please be patient as we're trying to fix things. With hybrid meetings, if you haven't done one, are quite the challenge. Are we good? What's it sound like online? Check. And is that better or online? Oh, thank you, Sarah. Okay. All right. Okay, I think we got it dialed in. Thank you. And our wonderful Gus. We never give Gus credit. He's our amazing audiovisual guy who gets this set up. All right. Thanks for your patience. Thank you. Okay, so really quick agenda overview. We're going to just go through the welcome and housekeeping like we ordinarily do. Then we'll provide some accountability and data updates, then some assessment updates, and Marcus Betancourt from ETS is going to be joining us towards the end of the time. We'll have a break thrown in there in between accountability data and then assessment. So give people a chance to stand up, move around, and get some coffee, get some water. But let's start off with this a little bit of, in the spirit of spring break, I thought I need a quote that's related to where education can take you, and who better than Dr. Seuss, right? The more that you read, the more things you will know, the more that you learn, the more places you'll go. So if you're in the room, turn to your neighbor, or if you're online, maybe take advantage of the chat. But share with us, to what surprising places has your education taken you? Maybe you were studying abroad at one point in education. Maybe you went to someplace exotic for graduate school. Maybe you've been to a seminar. So drop in the chat what you are experiencing or where it's taken you. I know my colleague Stephen just got back from Costa Rica, which, he found that he had a learning down there. Apparently, Google Maps does not tell you when you need that snorkel thing on your car. Because he was driving and he came to some major stream crossings that didn't get around. So it's a different kind of education, I guess, right, Stephen? So take a minute, turn to your neighbor. I know Hillary dropped in the chat, but if you're online, where is it taking you? Where's your education taking you? Or maybe even just where are you planning to spend some time in your next educational experience if it's travel involved? All right. I see some interesting stuff coming in. All right, Jeb, I see you're going on some, I'm going on some college visits myself. You're getting closer though to making that decision. At least I've got another year with my daughters who are juniors. But well, thank you for taking the time to chat. So what are some of the other comments just for people in the room who aren't online?
So we have some team building activities people are doing. The world of data, spreadsheets, and Power BI. Let's see. DC. Fort Irwin for community building camp in the summer. Yeah, Debbie put down New York and Albuquerque. And Wendy just dropped in Sacramento.
Yes, exciting Sacramento. I had the trip to Sacramento. I do learn a lot up there, and we were just up there for a RAN meeting, Stephen and I, so we'll bring back a lot of information from that. So finally, on that note, we'll start moving forward just to keep, all right, in. So just a reminder, Hillary's dropped in the chat a couple times, and if you're not online in the room, we do have everything, all the resources are in our Canvas page, so you can go back and access those. When we get the PowerPoint from Marcus from ETS, we'll make sure we load that up. So always in the chat or in the Canvas page, you'll find everything, and anything we post afterwards, you can find there too. It's like kind of ongoing resource. Just the reason why this is really to provide, we have a couple of new people in the room, so it's always good to revisit why Dan, why do we do this? And the idea is really just to give you the latest information around the areas of data assessment and accountability. We really look at those three. If you've sat in any of these seats, you start to realize, wow, they're very closely connected, right? That nexus of data assessment and accountability, so much that goes on the dashboard is driven by stuff that's going on in your assessment world and your participation rate, and is your data right in CalPads. It's so closely aligned. So we try to bring forward all the information that we can that's relevant, and we try to aggregate a lot of data, or a lot of information, so you don't always have to be looking for every email. Maybe you're not on the right listserv and you miss it. So we make sure all the most critical information gets to you. The information is current as of Friday. We all had the yesterday off, so I don't think anybody sent out any new information, but as of Friday, and this is the stuff that we know is out there. If it changes, we'll let you know about that too. And we'll try to answer in the chat as we go, or answer live. But we always like to follow up with a really deep cut on any questions, so we can give you the links that you need or the ed code that's being cited, so we can make sure you have backup. If somebody says, "Hey, where do you find that?" You'll have the right piece of information to say, it's not just LACOE Center, it was in their PowerPoint, but here's where it came from. But if you do have questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. And we have some breaks built in today. Or if you're in the room, raise your hand and give us a minute, we'll get you a mic so everybody online can hear it as well. Okay, so this upcoming 28th is the last meeting of the school year. It's again hybrid, we'll do it here. We are exploring different things. Next year's first meeting, we will get all this information out to you as soon as Karina gets back. Boy, you don't realize how much you miss somebody until they've been gone for a month. But our first meeting of next year will be October 1st. We're looking to have some for new coordinators trainings in between, because the new coordinator for CAASPP and ELPAC, the state's doing things a little bit differently. So we're looking to make a little network for brand new coordinators this year. that we'll be getting more information out, and that probably would meet before that October 1st meeting. So look for those, all the new dates coming up, but mark your calendar at least for the October 1st meeting at 9 o'clock. So right into the updates. First of all, congratulations to all those schools. 104 schools in LA County were named to distinguished schools this year, which is a great honor. One of the things that happened last year too, I don't think the information, the criteria for selection was sent out, so we did get that information to share with you here. So the schools were recognized in two categories. First was the exceptional student performance, and to be recognized for exceptional student performance, on the 2023 dashboard, the indicators for ELA, math, and suspension for all students had to be blue or green, or yellow if the yellow was based on a significant increase from the prior year's achievement level. So that was one. Also, for both of the assessments, they had to have met the 95% participation rate. And then finally, if you're a high schooler, you also had to have a blue or green for graduation rate on the 2023 dashboard. There's another category, which was for schools recognized for closing the achievement gap. In addition to the three criteria I just spoke to, which they had to have, they also needed to have 40% or more of their students were socioeconomically disadvantaged. And the school had to demonstrate exceptional growth for ELA or math for any student group that is targeted for accelerated achievement. I've got a list of all those student groups there. So congratulations, 104 schools. That's really pretty impressive. So we had a lot of schools that really saw a big rebound as compared to the number of schools identified for ATSI last year. Now to have this many distinguished schools is pretty impressive. So that's first good news. Second good news to start things off. So another good news piece, I think it's good news. I think most people are relieved to hear this. A communication went out on March 1st to superintendents that announced that the state will maintain the practice of including students who graduate by August 15th, we known as summer graduates. Those students will stay in their prior year adjusted cohort graduation rate. So that will affect what goes in data class, what goes on the dashboard for federal accountability purposes. So there's a lot of concern expressed from the field, like if we don't have the opportunity to include those students in the prior year, that's going to have a big impact because we have a lot of students who do wrap things up by August 15th. So they heard the message loud and clear, and so they reversed this, the original statement that they weren't going to include them, so they will be still included. And the CDE is just looking for ways to meet the increasingly tight deadlines to get the dashboard published in the upcoming in earlier and earlier dates. So speaking of which, so the dashboard publication dates, as you might remember, there was new statute is put into place by Assembly Bill 114, and that requires the annual publication of the dashboard moves up every year until 2026, when it'll be published on October 15th in conjunction with the release of the CAASPP and ELPAC data. So that's going to start happening now this year, and this is, I think, the good news. December 1st, as you may know if you've looked at your calendar, that's the Sunday after Thanksgiving. So the CDE has indicated they're really working to get the dashboard published by November 22nd. So even earlier, that's the Friday before Thanksgiving. So they're really pushing to make that happen. So that would give us an even better start this year to look at the data and start making plans around that data for your LCAP, or like you're going to start looking at it right on Thanksgiving. I know that's what everybody like, pull up, turkey and some stuffing, and let's look at our data. Also, so because of the last year, if you remember, so the proposed changes that have to go on the dashboard will be approved and expected in July at the state board meeting, and then the CalPADS end of the year deadline is August 16th. That's the day after the AIM meeting, that assessment and accountability information meeting that's online. There's usually multiple versions of it. So, and then the proposed public release of November 22nd, you'll see for a week prior. There's not going to be a rolling release of the data this time. They're going to give it 1 week prior to the release of the dashboard. All of it's going to come out at once. So look for that. So that'll be approximately November 15th. You'll start having your data to look at for the dashboard. So that's kind of the good news. I think those are going to get to sooner. It's kind of fulfilling the requests of the state board and also from superintendents around the state as to getting their data earlier to make decisions even sooner. A couple of just brief announcements in case you missed them, type things. So the DAS, the Dashboard Alternative School Status list went out. The application is open again, so the announcement went out. And you have to be a dashboard coordinator to get this. I actually put the announcement that I received on the campus page, so you can see the full announcement there. This is all for schools who are new to DAS, want to add DAS, or who are current schools who need to renew their application. And the deadline for the part 1 is May 15th. So mark the calendar for that. And just if you want to check out the eligibility criteria for DAS, which includes the list of schools that are automatically included, like alternative high schools, continuation schools, things like that that are automatically included. You don't have to apply. That's all on that link that I've been included there. So check those out if you're a DAS school or you're thinking you might be. There have been some small changes if you are a DAS school, including looking at, for the purposes of the submission, looking at the continuous enrollment of your student groups. So some of the schools are based on enrollment of high need students, and they're looking at a continuous enrollment instead of the point in time. So that may change your calculation of whether you qualify for DAS or not. And there still are some advantages to being a DAS school when it comes to federal eligibility for CSI, ATSI that you may want to look into. Then I just wanted to make available, let everybody know, the LCAP state and federal program team put on a great workshop. We joined them. This was it just last week, team? I know it feels like it was a month ago, but it's just last week regarding CSI and ATSI. So if you have a school that's in CSI or ATSI, which is now a 3-year list, right? If you want to know about things like the exit criteria or even the eligibility, how they got in there, and you weren't able to attend this meeting, I've included the links in the agenda as well as on this slide for the recording of the meeting, as well as all of the resources that are there. And there are a lot of resources. The LCAP State and Federal Program team did a great job. It's really everything you could possibly want to know about CSI, ATSI in one place. Okay. So moving forward, the state has a lot of work to do this year. I know this feels like this is accountability. It's like April, it's middle of testing. Shouldn't we be talking testing? But there's so much stuff going on related to the dashboard that we wanted to share with you. A lot of stuff that just came out this last month at the state board meeting, as well as at the CPAG meeting, which happened this month. That's the California Practitioners Advisory Group, which advises on the dashboard and all things accountability. So we're going to take a look at some of these individual pieces one by one. So let's jump into those. So first of all, and I know this is really exciting to people in the science world, science is going to be included on the dashboard moving forward. So a lot of folks have been advocating for it. It's like if it's not measured, it doesn't matter kind of thing, right? So CVE is saying, you know, in response to the state board, we're adding science to the dashboard beginning in 2024. In 2024, this fall, it will only be represented by a baseball card, and I'll show you what that'll look like, a mock-up in just a slide. And then in 2025, then the determinations will be made around things like status and change cut points, the 5x5 color grids, and then future decisions about if and how science could be included in identification for differentiated assistance for districts and CSI, ATSI for schools. So those are all a lot of big questions swirling around, and there's a lot of tricky things about science that's very different from ELA math. We'll talk about a couple of those.
Evan?
Yes.
Your sound is very muffled. We're all hearing it in the chat.
For those of you in Zoom land, my excitement about accountability is maybe what muffled me. I apologize. Is it better? Check now. Okay. I know. Okay. I think the coffee was kicking in too. I'm not sure. Maybe. But no, you know what? I get excited about seeing science on the dashboard. What can I say? I like to see Stephen too. He's like, you know, giddy. So the first decision point, this is what this year's work includes, and this is taking place right now, is the approval of the metric. So it may seem like straightforward, you know, an instinct to say, oh, well, it's like ELA and math, right? It's just another It's just another measure, but it's actually significantly different for those of you, like, first of all, it's only given in grades 5, 8, and then once in high school, but you can give it in different grades. You could give it in grade 10, 11, or 12. So this raises some questions around participation rate, and things like, how do you measure it? Do you measure science as a cohort model? So if they hold off on reporting your score until 12th grade when everybody has graduated, or do they do it, simultaneously, all your performance of your 10th, 11th, and 12th graders in 1 year? So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered before they can really put it on the dashboard. So that's the work that's taking place right now. Additionally, how would you calculate a participation rate? So if you're going to do something like everybody being calculated all at once, so 10th, 11th, and 12th all being in any 1 year, how would you know if how would you calculate participation rate? So there are some tricky things. Additionally, the test itself also only has about a 100-point range between the highest and lowest at each grade level versus the CAASPP, which has like a 500-point range. And are those things valid? So are the scores as valid? Can they be used in the same way? So one of the questions is, can we use distance from standard, or do we have to use a different type of measure? So those are all things that they're contemplating right now, but look to the state board to be approving that in June. So that's not too far off. So it's a very quick turnaround on this. Here's the mock-up of the science baseball card. So for 2024, they do have results, right? We have 2023 results, we'll have 2024 results, and they will show whatever it is. If it's distance from standard, above standard, 10.4 points above standard, for example, and then the change from the prior year. But there won't be these descriptors, so you won't see the levels. You won't know, is that status, is that a high status, is that a medium status, is that a very low status? None of that will be revealed, and the change won't be described as increased or decreased, and then there won't be any color assigned to it either. And typically the color is what indicates that it's being used for accountability. So that's what you can take away from that. There are a bunch more decision points that will have to be made in 2025. So you'll have the approval of the cut scores. So they'll look at all the data. And this is how they determine cut scores, is they look at the distribution of LEAs in schools around the state, come up with that 5x5 grid, and what will be the cut points for status, what will be the cut points for change. How do we assign the 5x5? Do we use a balanced 5x5 like we do for ELA and math, or do we do a traditional 5x5? And then the big question is, like, how would this be used for differentiated assistance? And how would it be potentially used for ESSA eligibility for CSI, ATSI? So these are all things you don't have to worry about now. This is stuff that won't be coming up until 2025, and these types of questions would be around the 2025 dashboard, but just so you know, they're out there happening. So let's take a few minutes, both online using the chat and in the room. Let's process this for a minute, have a little discussion. What do you feel will be the impact of including science on the dashboard, good or bad? Weigh in on it. And also, who in your LEA needs to know this? So maybe just in the chat, maybe it'll trigger, who do I think needs to know this information? And just for, we'll go with the handheld mic again. I can get the handheld mic a little bit better for those of you who are online. we'll give those folks in the room just another minute to wrap up. Hey, what are some of the comments? So can you give me some curated list of a couple of comments?
We have some people saying that science will be a great addition. Sirs, Sarah made a comment, agreeing with some of the others, but also heads up the school boards who are, who look at the dashboard. Sites and ed services. It's going to spark conversation about high school science curriculum, timelines, and accountability.
Anybody want to share their insights? I'll bring the mic around. Anybody? And I'll bring the mic over. Any big takeaways from the room? Okay. I think you tapped on all of the concerns. I think in talking to our colleagues here who in the STEM unit, if you look at the initial data, it's like it has the NGSS been fully adopted. It's always that question: are we ready for it to be held accountable for it? Right? We want it's like the double-edged sword. We want it on the dashboard because then people take it seriously, but are we already there yet? Have we given enough support to our teachers in terms of teaching this? Do they have the resources they need? Have they had adequate training? So it's a bit of both, and certainly having it on the dashboard, however they figure out how it will work out, will be great. But the flip side is that accountability and whether or not it's accurate.
We did have an interesting question come right in that asked about science interims, and they'll be added to tools for teachers from the interim portal. I didn't know if we had any information about that.
I'm looking to my CAASPP colleagues on that question.
So I don't believe that currently a plan to add science materials in for the CAASPP into the tools for teachers lessons, for example. There is, and I'll note it later, there is the release of a second set of CAASPP interims coming in this summer. So there'll be additional resources available in terms of interim assessments. But I believe that's something that's been reiterated to the state, and we'll be happy to elevate that as well.
Okay, I saw your quote or comment there, David. How's that? With regards to the microphone. I'm really struggling with the mics today. Is that better? Okay, well, I'll just keep talking and hopefully it'll get better. Gotta tell you, I'm not a fan of hybrid meetings. So I think next year we may ditch hybrid and we'll just do online, standalone and in person for the folks, because it's really just too hard to kind of keep it all going. So let's give you some background on some other features coming up. So 2 new student groups are going to be added to the dashboard. Transitional kindergarten and long-term English learners. So I think everybody's probably heard that. And so we'll talk a little bit about each one of them separately. So this year, CalPADS is collecting TK as a separate grade. It used to be collected as a program, so you really couldn't disaggregate TK as its own group. But this year, TK is getting reported as its own group. So we'll be able to disaggregate that to better meet the requirements of Ed Code. And it's really the first opportunity for CDE to differentiate on the dashboard. So that'll be a big deal. So now, how does TK appear on the dashboard? Well, it appears and it doesn't appear right now in a couple ways. So it's embedded in the suspension rate and the chronic absenteeism indicator as K, like they're considered K-12 or well K-8 for chronic absenteeism, K-12, but TK has been embedded within that until now. So now we'll be able to break it out a little bit further. And then currently on the dashboard, TK students are excluded from the LP because we know it's only grades 1 through 12 which are included, and that'll continue. So it's still going to be a grade 1 through 12 calculation. And then also at the bottom of your dashboard, there's some information about enrollment data and information, and the directory details, which are included on the dashboard, don't break out TK either. As far as the new LTEL definition, we've gone over this in past meetings, but there is this new definition that was added, which is a student who has not attained English proficiency within 7 years of their initial classification as an English learner. And this is going to be the 14th student group to be added to the dashboard. So the same N size rules will apply. So if it's there as are held for foster youth and homeless student group, so a group of 15 or more for the LEA size for districts, that is, and or county offices, or 30 or more will be held accountable at the school level. That includes charter schools who are considered their own LEA, but you're treated as a school for the purposes of accountability. So that's going to be, and I know there's a lot of talk already and a lot of confusion on this. That is, just to go back, that's not, it's a new definition. It's a separate definition from the 313.1 definition, which still exists. Question in the room. Well, so the question in the room, I'll just try to reiterate, is the question around the identification of English learners. There's actually legislation out there right now, which would make TK students not required to take the initial LPAC. And we'll get some more information about that in the follow-up. But there are questions around, is it a valid measure of their abilities, because the students are not, at that age, they're very shy, and you're meeting a stranger. So there's a lot of elements of the initial LPAC that may not be an accurate measure. So that's legislation that's out there. So will be a factor, and it really address that. And also TK would become a factor for the purposes of long-term English learners if they weren't excluded, because your initial classification as a TK would make that clock start ticking for those 7+ years. So that's another factor that I think people are very curious about. That's at least partially the reason behind that legislation.
We had a question roll in, Evan, maybe you can answer. So when should LEAs use the new definitions versus the existing definitions?
Well, that is a great question. So I will say this, there's still requirements around 313.1 for the notification of parents with regards to a student being a long-term English learner or being at risk of being a long-term English learner. You should still use the old definition for that. But having said that, that's the old definition has a lot more factors. So by definition, it's usually a smaller group. A lot of LEAs already opt to be more broad in the calculation because it's just a little bit easier, right? Instead of trying to calculate yourself. And we'll talk later on about that. There's a file that the state's going to be putting out very soon that identifies who your LTELs and at risk of LTEL students are. But in the meantime, yes, you really need to be worried about this for your dashboard, and I would use it for your LCAP, just because it's all part of the same system. So using this, and I think we'll have more understanding. We've tried to calculate it. There are some big questions around LTEL, so they're swirling around the question of LTELs. Is it 7 years as of the day? Right, so then you'd have this kind of rolling group, right? Every time so it would be a moving group, or it would be all students who've reached 7 years as of this following date, right? And those would be your LTELs. Or is it annual enrollment in any school year? So if a student registered in the last, in March, on March 26th of 2024, fast forward 7 years, that last section of the 2023-24 school year counts as a full year. And I tried to actually generate the file myself, at which point I said, I threw my hands up. I know there's some folks in here who actually have been calculating this for their LCAP, because in many cases you may have to have a metric. If you plan to use supplemental concentration grant funding for an action, you need to have a measure of its effectiveness. So how do we do that with our LTEL? So if you have that group, it's a really challenging task until the state produces some of the data. It's going to be really hard to do it yourself. But where I would look for this new definition, because it is broader, you'll catch more students, would be in accountability. So LCAP, SIPSA potentially even, but the other definition is still useful for notification. So where the LTELs will really appear on the dashboard in 2024, you'll see them in all these groups: suspension, graduation rate. That's another factor that has to be considered for the cohort. If they're an LTEL on day 1 of 9th grade and they're reclassified, are they going to appear on the dashboard as LTELs? Right, so that's a consideration that has to be determined by the CDE and approved by the state board. And that would affect the college and career indicator. How are we looking at LTELs within that cohort? Then chronic absenteeism indicator, they'll obviously get picked up in the older grades if they're middle school. Academic indicators, the determination for how that works, if they were reclassified at what point in the school will they be considered, if they were reclassified before census day, for example, right? Or, any number of variables that would determine how they're represented in the academic indicator, and that would also factor into your participation rate. So it gets very complex. I really have trouble to get my head around it. Fortunately, we shouldn't have to worry about it. It'll all be determined and will be shared soon. And then finally, this one is determined. So the English language progress indicator will now have English learners, and then one single, doesn't have any student groups currently, but they'll add the student group of long-term English learners, right? So your LP will be both and, right? So it'll be a student group underneath the LP.
And then the question that's on everyone's mind in Zoom land is, when will the CDE have the LTEL report? When will that be available?
The LTEL report, so I think I mentioned it last time, but yes, the LTEL report for individual students is going to be published probably in April. I couldn't put a hard date on it, but I have a slide coming up where we talk there's going to be 3 major data releases through the SOARS system. And I can't remember the name of it. When I get to the slide, it's spelled out. And those are all forthcoming. There's student level data files that are going to be dropped anytime, if that's what they're looking for. There's also then the LTEL, LTEL data quest report. I think the LTEL data quest report's already been posted. Does that answer that question? Okay. Okay, so the work plan for this year, CDE is already conducting technical work to operationalize the inclusion of the LTELs on the dashboard. So they're looking at how to factor in cumulative enrollment, the cohort calculations, like I was just mentioning, and in the assessment demographics, when is a student an LTEL versus when is a student just an English learner, and then also a factor of, okay, do we extend LTELs? Do they get the benefit like English learners do of having reclassified students for up to 4 years? So there's a lot of factors that the CDE must present to the state board for final approval. And so that takes place through various groups, including the CPAG group. Like I said, showed you, I think that same timeline for approval will be around June of this year. So college and career indicator, a lot of moving parts with the college and career indicator. We just have the status only approved this year or shown this year. But there are a couple of things that are kind of been pending out there. So there are 4 new career measures that have been posted since 2020-21. We've only ever collected the data on them. We've never reported them out on the dashboard as part of the college career indicator. And these include, and that's some really exciting ones really in terms of what districts may be able to do with students internships, student-led enterprise, like you're running a student store at lunchtime outside of your regular career tech ed class. All these things are very familiar to me from my days in the regional occupational program years ago. Student simulated work-based learning, like virtual enterprise, is being evaluated. And then the use of the armed services vocational aptitude battery test, the results from that could be used for that. Additionally, so what would happen now, potentially they would include 1 more year of this data being reviewed, because we didn't decide not to put it on the 2023 dashboard. So the state board would have to direct the additional data collected for 2022-23 to be evaluated. And then if they decide that they want to move forward to put on the dashboards, state board will provide additional guidance. I don't know if that would be on the 2024 dashboard or not. If these would be included, probably not until 2025. So that's all pending. Additionally, there will be, I'm looking at the one CalPADS in the room that I know is going to be relieved. CD is conducting an additional ad hoc data collection, so ad hoc, not in CalPADS, to measure the state seal of civic engagement. So if someone in your district is responsible for overseeing that, if you're collecting, if anybody's reporting it, it'll be an ad hoc collection. They're going to start using that data because the state board president, Linda Darling Hammond, has asked that the state seal of civic engagement become a factor in the College Career Indicator. So look for that, and we'll give you more information when it drops, that ad hoc data collection. And then also, the CD is soliciting feedback about the use of industry certifications within CTE pathways. So that's another potential measure that will be added in the future. There are a couple of things, since I was on College Career Indicator, this isn't in the state work plan, but I thought they were appropriate to share here. These were in the CalPADS regional quarterly meeting, but there was a couple clarifications that they wanted to point out, and these are kind of big ones, around these pieces of the College and Career Indicator and how the data should be understood by LEOs. So first was college credit courses. So what they discovered, what CD discovered, kind of indirectly, and I feel like I might have been guilty of promoting this kind of thinking as well. But some LEOs have been submitting college courses just based on students returning with a college credit course. They said, hey, we've got another kid we can add to the college credit course to our CCI. And that's not the intent. So the intent of the College Career Indicator is to capture what LEAs are providing, what pathways they're providing, and it's basically a measure of your broad course of study. And so they look at that as being an inauthentic measure if you aren't responsible for facilitating that, for setting it up with a community college. So there's some clarification. It's actually in the technical guide for the dashboard, but basically they won't count that. So it's got to be a course that you help set up. If it's a dual enrollment program that you have an agreement, an MOU with a community college, that's what they're looking for. So it's a little bit different than what we've said in the past, like just capture everything. Everybody comes in from the summer with their makeup classes, throw them in there. So it really has got to be something that's set up. And then in addition, and I think we've kind of known this, but they're very clear about it, for a CTE pathway, you have the added criteria for receiving the prepared level. One was the summative, smart about summative assessments. You had to have a 3 on one test and a 2 on the other. Or you could have one semester, 2 quarters of a college credit class. A lot of people had a capstone class that was a dual enrollment course. And so they said, well, you can't double dip, right? So you'll only get the CTE pathway for that college credit course. You won't be able to say a student is prepared because they took a pathway and a college credit. Can't count both regards. So a college credit course would have to be in a different pathway for you to get all the benefits of a student completing a CTE pathway and taking a course in a community college. So that one we've always wondered, and that one now it's pretty clear what they're looking for. Okay, some other things, and this kind of falls into the data group, but priority one, just a little teacher data. So the teacher assignments, priority one. We know that in 2023, the state board adopted the display of how it would be displayed, right? And so we have that a sample here of just this percentage of teachers that have a clear credential through the teacher assignment monitoring process, and then kind of the subsequent application of the federal definitions of out of class or out of field teachers and ineffective teachers. So we know what they came up with that. We also know that they updated the state, the reflection tool for priority one, reflect this. And we know that this TAMO data will be automatically populated on the dashboard again. And if it's not populated for the purposes of your local indicators, you're just supposed to share the data when it finally is populated, share that with your board. Even if it comes after the date at which you share, you have to come back to the board with that. But clearly this has been a bit of a stickler for everybody. The CD noted that there's been a lot of technical and policy support, and you can read between the lines. This means I've been emailing them a lot. Districts have been emailing, like, what does this mean? Can you help me? And just things like, how do you understand, how do we interpret that data, right? So they recognize It's very challenging. There's just a lot of inconsistencies even between the SARC and how it's reported in the SARC, how it's reported in the on the dashboard. So they've been continuing to support, and they will continue to support. They've said so. Keep your emails flowing. I guess I'd interpret it that way. They also have the year 3 camo data will be published soon, and there's a new report that's coming out. It's called the Staff Demographic Experience and Education Data Multiple Years Report, and that'll come out on DataQuest this spring. I'm assuming the same time that the year 3 camo. So there'll be some additional data that they'll provide additional support around. We will dive in, take a look at it, and talk about how you might be able to use it as well. And then finally, as if that weren't enough, the growth model. Remember this growth model? Remember, the sky was going to be falling when they released this data. So back in May 2021, the state board approved this growth model calculation, the EBLIP model. I know it's like super nerdy. But we looked at it a lot. And a lot of people were very interested in it. It requires 3 years worth of CAASPP data. And of course, then we had a pandemic and it disrupted the administration of the CAASPP. So we lost all that lead time. So they're back at it. So this year, the CD is going to release the initial set of ELA math growth data. And it is really exciting data because it does, to some extent, allow a comparison of growth between schools and student groups at those schools. So you can actually see it's not just what percentage of students met or exceeded standard, how much did students grow in certain schools. And so it'll be really interesting data that they're going to be releasing. The results of the release will then allow the state board to consider, and this is all they're doing, but considering how they could use the growth data on the dashboard and also potentially to use it in support determination. So differentiated assistance, CSI, ATSI. So it's possible the growth data will be included in that, but they have to get it published first. And so it'll be published after the dashboard comes out. So there will be a subsequent release. The dashboard will be published November 22nd, we think, or thereabouts. And then the CD is going to release this initial set of the individual student level growth data. And it will be on a separate site, but you'll have downloadable data files in conjunction with that, aggregated growth scores, the school, district, and student group levels, and then there will be a graphic display that's available too. This will be not directly on the dashboard, so you'll we'll see it elsewhere, but this will be some interesting information and will provide you additional support. Expect to see a lot of support for districts around this, similar to what they did last time with webinars and other flyers and things to help support an explanation, because some people will maybe look to this as a some people being educational partners may look to this data and have concerns or not know what it means, and you may be called upon as the assessment person or the accountability person for your LEA to explain it. So they know it's not easy to explain, so they're going to look to provide a lot of information. Okay, that was a lot. We have questions, Hillary? Okay. I think sometimes stunned silence is an indicator of too much, but let's take a few minutes at the tables or in the chat just to put any additional questions you may have. I may not be able to answer them now, but if you have questions, give us some time in our follow-up and we'll post some questions. We can even ask some questions of the CDE. So what are your questions around TK and LTELs, the college per indicator, teacher assignment data, or the growth model? And again, who needs to know this information at your LEA? Share who you're thinking needs to know, and somebody else may see that and go, oh yeah, I didn't think about that person. I should definitely tell that person about this. So take a couple minutes to chat at your tables or in the chat online. And we do have some really good questions in the chat, so Hillary's going to read me a couple, and I'll try to answer them live. And if you have any questions in the room too.
First overview, it's two parts. The first part was dealing with TANO data and sort of the data and how that flows through the various systems.
So the TAMO data, the reason it lagged so far behind, so last year, when it was published, people were like, but this is really old data. It's 2021, 22. So the way it works is, and I'll just use this year as an example. So the fall 2 CalPAD submission that just ended, that data includes all the teacher assignment data that will be used for teacher assignment monitoring. And LACOE is the assignment monitoring authority who works with your HR people to determine if people are properly credentialed. That's a whole separate process that has to take place, but they rely on all the same systems, what eventually gets on the dashboard. That data is certified. When was that? Last Friday, Jaime? Yeah, so last Friday. And then this summer, it'll appear in a separate system called CAASPP, right? And that's an HR tool. And there's a whole process that takes place around CAASPP where your HR credential specialist works with LACOE to certify or to clarify, oh, this person, oh, they've got a local assignment option. We didn't put that assignment option in CalPads, et cetera, et cetera. And so then they go through, they clear everything. And then you think, okay, that's done around October. Then it goes through another process. They download all the data, they give it to the CDE. The CDE then has to go back and match all that data and come through it piece by piece and look for and apply a different set of definitions than the state and the CTC applies, which are these definitions, these federal definitions for what's out of field, what's ineffective. And so then, then they reapply the FTE. It's why it comes out so late, and it's a very time-consuming task. So it's not automated, but that is the system. So it does all start in CalPads. It goes through CalSAS, then it comes back to the CDE for further scrutiny.
Okay, and the second part to that, which was a clarification, is now that the CDE has released the 2021-22 TAML reports, the 2023 dashboard, are LEA's charters required to present this at their next board meeting? Or does this rule apply to the 2024 dashboard, which will include the 2022-2023 TAMO?
That was a great question. So what the rules are regarding, because this is part of the local indicator, so just be clear on this. The local indicator for priority 1 for this year has to include that 22-23 data. And if it gets published by the CDE prior to your LCAP meeting, your LCAP approval meeting, I'm looking at my LCAP team here, is you have to share your local indicators at the same meeting as the approval of the LCAP and in a non-consent item. So you're going to need to share that data. Now, if that data is not published, then the CDE has explicitly said that you have to share it at the next possible board meeting after it is published. So you can take it to your board without the data if it hasn't been published yet. And then in subsequent meetings, when it has been published, you have to go back with that particular item of information. So that's the rule on that. It'll have to be the 22-23 data, which is the same data that will automatically populate on the dashboard. The questions?
I think we had an LTEL question. We have a few of them. Let's see. So we're asking, what is the rationale for defining an LTEL under the new accountability starting at 7 years versus the traditional LTEL definition starting at 6 years?
So the rationale is that there is not going to be a way for accountability purposes. So a lot of groups, a lot of folks wanted to see LTELs. We know that's a really challenging student group. They want to see them represented in a way that would hold schools accountable for them. But it's virtually impossible because there are too many data points. It's not just the 6 years, but you add on if they've made progress on the ELPAC, if they've where they are in relation to ELA, in relation to their peers. And there's just too much to get all that done for that student group to be viable. So there was a group that was pulled together specifically around this, and they kind of came to this. Here's the conclusion we reached. Let's just settle on 7 years from the identification for the purposes of for the purposes of accountability group. So it's probably broader than that other group. But it was, that was how they reached it. And it was just largely because it wasn't going to be feasible to do it any other way. And I think within that, there's still some wrinkles as we were talking about. It's like, well, 7 years as of one. And I know when I tried to do it, it's like, oh boy, it gets really tricky. And you want to be able to also then monitor these students, right? If you have long-term English learners, you want to know who they are because you want to provide them additional support. How would you be making sure let's say you're offering an additional class for your long-term English learners in middle school, it's a support period, you're going to fund it with supplemental concentration grant funding, so you have to show its effectiveness. You then have to be able to identify the students even to put in that class. So there's a lot of wrinkles around that.
We had 2 more questions that might be a little bit shorter. One was asking, did they ever publish the 2021, 2022 RFEP rates?
No, they haven't yet published those. So there is a notification. I think we showed in one of our DAAN Digest, but there was a data quest communication number 19, and they did say that they're going to be publishing multiple years of the reclassification rate because we haven't seen one for so long. So the thing that is holding it up is it's not statutorily required. So it always takes second fiddle to other stuff that is, like the production of the LTEL individual student level file. That's required in EdCode. The reclassification rate is not. So, but they did promise it would be out this spring. I just don't know exact date. So it should be still forthcoming.
And the last question here, probably not with an answer yet, but some interesting dialogue. Will growth model eventually replace the change score in determining dashboard color?
I don't know yet, but there are states that use growth model. We were kind of late to the game with growth. And I know that there has been some interest expressed by the state board about including that. So you might have an academic indicator that includes ELO, math, science, and your growth data for both ELA and math. 5 things informing one. And so that's what they've talked about, how reasonable that is to do. But growth is such a different measure, I guess, is what they're looking for. They think it could benefit schools to be, some schools that may not get the recognition because some of their students are below standard, or, distance from standard is below standard, but they may be making exceptional growth for student groups. So they think it could be a beneficial way of bringing light to the changes that are taking place in a district which is dealing with a lot of students who face a lot of barriers. So, okay. I have just a couple of quick things, and then we're going to take a break. So this reminder, this came from our CalPADS regional meeting. Also, and I think I want to really highlight this because for assessment people, this is important. The state has determined, as you know, you could still reclassify a student using their summative LPAC scores from the 2022-23 school year. So you may have students who haven't been reclassified yet for whatever reason, but they scored a 4 and could be eligible now. And you can do that. And if you reclassify those students within the summative LPAC window, they actually are removed from the file, and they'll be removed for the purposes of the participation rate calculation. But we all know it also takes some time for information to get from CalPADS to ETS. So the state is recommending that you do that reclassification no later than May 15th. We've said in the past, everybody, as long as it's done by May 31st, but they're definitely saying if you think you may be reclassifying a student based on 22-23 LPAC results, do the reclassification, have it in CalPADS no later than May 15th. So it won't affect your participation rate calculation. Yes. So the question is, how does that affect the reclassification rate? It shouldn't, in terms of the LCAP or what they're reporting, it shouldn't have an impact because you're still, right. It'll show up as a reclassification within the 23-24 school year. But this is just for the purposes of making sure they don't get dung on the dashboard for participation, because they could technically still reclassify after that May 31st date. They can't use the 22-23 results any further. They would have to rely on the 23-24, and hopefully they've administered. So, but it shouldn't have, it'll still show up as a reclassification within the current school year. Okay. So I mentioned this, the student online accountable record status or SOAR system. You just feel like there should be an eagle flying across the screen right now, a little animation. So this is the tool, this is the system whereby the CDE can release individual student level data files. So 3 big releases coming up. We already talked about that long-term English learner data file. So this is the one where they apply Ed Code 313.1 criteria, and that will be coming out, I expect in April. Then there's also the College Career Indicator student level data files. This is really good if you're wondering what happened, because we don't see all the information that goes into the College Career Indicator in CalPads. There are some great reports there, but they don't capture your students who get identified for AP exams, right? That comes directly from the College Board or ETS. This file shows you what all your students, if they're prepared, approaching prepared, not prepared, what criteria they met. It'll mark all the boxes so you can go if you want to see. I'm really confused. And I've had a lot of questions around this. Like, we have students who should have been receiving the AP exams credit. Why did we get 0 students credited for that? You can look at this data file, and this will be for last year, not the current year, but for your 2023 grads, and you may do a little unpacking of it to find out maybe what happened. And finally, your 1-year DAS graduation rate. This has been promised by the CDE. They'll continue publishing your DAS graduation rate if you have a DAS school in your LE, or if you are a DAS school. So you're being held accountable on the dashboard by the 4-year plus 5-year graduation rate. The 1 year had totally different rules, and it's still being published, and it'll be published here. And then the last piece of data that was released is this notification of the charter school data file. We've included the notification here, as well as on our Canvas page, and it really gives you a list of all the charter schools and their performance categories, as well as some resources if you need to explain, if you're a charter school and you're looking to explain what these various categories mean and how they're calculated. There's a flyer which we have a screenshot of on this page that might find useful, as well as some other descriptions. And that is it. Here's our team. And of course, we always encourage people to make an appointment with us if you have questions. We're happy to get on Zoom and walk through something that you're having questions about. We've had, by the way, just some great questions that have come in. Like, you guys really know how to stump the team. Like, I'm like reaching out to CDE pretty regularly. I can't explain, like, how was this school identified for ATSI? And it's always something like so in the weeds, and that we find out, and we like to share those. Any other questions, Hillary, that have come up? Okay. Well, let's take a 10-minute break. It's 10:06. Why don't we come back at 10:16, and we're going to pause here, and we'll come back, and we've got our assessment updates with Stephen and Marcus from ETS will be joining us. So take 10.
No. Got it.
No?
Test it.
Okay. Excellent. So we'll look briefly at a few definitions for criteria for reclassification when related to the emails you got about ensuring that you're reclassified prior to the end of the testing window. And there is a question in the chat about that reclassification based on criteria before the test window, but having tested with the ELPAC in that current testing window. I believe the procedure or the protocol for that type of scenario would be to go ahead and reclassify if the student did meet those all four criterion and then cancel the administration in the current year.
In Zoom land, can you hear me? And can you hear me clearly? Not clearly. Here, try with this. We're going to switch mics here real quick and give us a reading when Stephen gets on.
How are we doing now? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm not in the room. I don't think. Okay. Okay, so we're going to look really briefly at some definitions for criteria for reclassification that you'll find in the ELPAC information guide. So CDE reiterated a statement at this most recent RAN meeting, which was with regard to reclassification of students, that list of students who had taken the ELPAC in the prior year or the alternate ELPAC in the prior year and reached Criterion 1 requirements for reclassification and yet had not been reclassified. The statement was with regard to students who take the alternate assessments that the bar, which is locally determined, may be set at a higher level than one would expect. And those expectations come out of this language from reclassification criteria for criteria 4. And so we'll go through a few of those definitions. So the criteria 4 talks about range of performance and basic skills. The range in basic skills in English is going to correspond to performance level for students with similar disabilities in the grade level or grade span. So performance and basic skills would be based on recent administration of objective assessment, in many cases in grade levels affected. It's the CAA. It might be a district benchmark that's utilized. We've talked and surveyed within DAAN on commonly used benchmarks. I believe state level, they're going to be looking at what's being used across the state as well. And then I note that students are considered based on students in the same grade level and against average native English speakers. So this is criteria 4 definitions. So when you're guiding your LEA in determining criteria 4 definition, when that's locally determined, those performance ranges should be selected locally, determined based on a locally determined assessment instrument. Oftentimes that's CAA, sometimes that's a different assessment, and compared to average native English speakers, keeping in mind that students with scores at or above the performance range selected by you should be considered for reclassification. So just looking at the state level, now you would, of course, look at your own LEA's performance for the alternate ELPAC to determine average native English speaker performance at a grade level, you can use CDE's CAASPP-LPAC.ets.org website or other data to look at CAA performance only of English learners, give you an idea of average native English speaker performance at an individual grade level. You can see that 50% at some levels, at some grade levels, grade 3, 4, 5, might be a level 1, grade 5 might be a level 2. It might be different for your individual LEA. CDs suggested that level 3 on the alternate California alternate assessment might be considered, but in many cases it might be too high a bar, just based on your local assessment of English only speakers at same grade level with same circumstances for those identifications for alternate assessments. So take a moment to look at your own LEA's performance of students, average performance for English only students, and guide that for your LEA. There's some clarifications that, so some LEAs within Los Angeles County asked for some clarification on what made a student exempt as a newcomer ELA exempt student in terms of the data. There's some differences between what you find in dashboard versus data delivered back to us in TOMS and delivered back to us in that website mentioned previously. So this CAASPP-LPAC.ets.org site where we see the data for those assessments. And so a little clarification on those distinctions. On that test results for California's assessments website, that's this guy. You're going to find ELA performance included and math performance included for students. So you may have a slightly different result for your scores because of the inclusion of newcomers in that data versus dashboard. And in dashboard, you're going to have ELA performance excluded, math performance excluded, ELA participation excluded, but math participation included. So students have to test with the math, newcomer students, newcomer ELs. Newcomer ELs would be excluded from participation, so do not have to test with the ELA CAASPP test. And performance would be excluded. That distance from standard would be excluded for both ELA and math. Moving on to some updates from the Regional Assessment Network. There are some proposed changes in the prior State Board of Education meeting, setting the date at which you can test back 2 weeks, so that testing windows will end on June 30th rather than July 15th. There are 2 versions of this in the regulations proposed at that Board of Education meeting. One is emergency regulation, and one includes the comment period. The emergency regulation was intended to be effective this year, and the one with the comment period will be effective in this coming test administration. This is anticipated to have 0 effect on any LEA. If you have an effect at your please do let us know. But from prior testing history, no LEAs were testing during that period. The reason for this change is to make it easier to meet the October 15th testing results calculation and distribution deadline. I'm sure I'm going to overlap with something that will be mentioned also by Marcus here, but this was presented by Rain or at Rain, so I'll mention it here as well. There's going to be the much anticipated website redesign coming in this year. Combining two sites into one, the CAASPP.org site and the ELPAC.org site are going to become CAASPP-ELPAC.org. As an LEA, primary LEA coordinator, you'll get a notification of this change first, and we'll have the chance to provide information to your site coordinators and staff prior to that the final rollout. But you'll have a chance to preview that. Input on this has come from sessions with CDE, success agents, focus groups, and focus groups with test examiners, and some live polls. They're intending to have a user-centered approach, focusing on some better organization and navigation menus, grouping of topics, and some collapsible text and page search. And very important here is the ease of identification between CAASPP and ELPAC resources. So what are you looking at in terms of those CAASPP resources, what's only applicable to CAASPP and only applicable to ELPAC? Then you have it differentiated by icon and by filters. And so it should be able to be determined what you're looking for. We've mentioned this before, but it's bears mentioning again. The SSRs are going to be redesigned, of course, this year, excluding the initial ELPAC, which will wait for next year. You're going to have a single SSR, including all of CAST and ELA and math. The effect of that is going to be SSR delivery for math won't, or ELA, for example, will not precede other sections. So you'll have a single delivery of an SSR, but that may be later because you won't have each of those individual SSRs, maybe CAST, showing up at a different time based on those scores being completed, those tests being completed earlier. There's of course going to be more detailed results for Smarter Balance ELA mathematics, and that would be in terms of composite claim results. You're going to have Lexile and Quantile rather than a separate SSR for that. That's going to be included. WEs or WR scores are also going to be added to those SSRs. So much anticipated to inform all our partners, our educational partners, on how students are performing on that writing extended response section, including the category the students were assessed with. There's going to be score comparisons added, so those averages will be returned for state averages, and that's going to show up on CAST, and on state averages going to return for the CAA. Also something Marcus, I'm sure, will mention, test security audit process, if you were on the coffee sessions, or this was mentioned, I believe, at the past coffee session by Bob Martin for the first time. There's going to be a test security audit process that has 3 tiers this coming year. An online audit survey would be tier 1, a virtual meeting would be tier 2, and tier 3 would be in-person visit. Defining what those are, 200 schools will receive the random audit, and then that will identify students for tier 2 for follow-up questions if necessary, using a virtual meeting, and in-person is tier 3. I note that you may be identified for tier 2 or tier 3 based on incidents within your LACOE cases or social media posts, for example. Even if you are not part of that 200 schools randomly selected to complete an audit survey. So you can be included in a higher tier even if you were not part of tier 1. California Assessments Conference, and I'll advertise this for the state here. 6th Annual California Assessment Conference will be held in Riverside, California, October 15th through 17th. So easy to get to for us. It was in Sacramento last year. The theme is empowering educators, leveraging assessment data and tools for classroom success. We had some incredible partners in LACOE, LACOE partner districts, Los Angeles County districts this last year, and presented some really valuable information for the state. We'd love to have some of our partner Los Angeles County LEAs present with us again this coming year. Send us an email at assessment@laco.edu and let us know your interest. And of course, we'll reach out to many of our partners here in the coming weeks as we develop some presentations and material for this coming year. So please think about practices you'd like to elevate at the state level. We'd love to present with you. Registration also is opening soon. Looking at ELPAC, those are alpacas. So if you have no idea why there's a picture of 2 staring animals at you, that is a joke, I think. There was an email a few weeks ago, which alerted you of an issue of initial LPACs that hadn't been completed. So even though the state is at a 97% or above initial LPAC or initial LPAC completion rate, there still are many thousands of students to be tested with initial LPAC. So ensure that your LEA is looking at your initial LPAC completion rates and ensuring that students are tested within those 30 days. The initial alternate LPAC also has 58 students statewide that need to be tested. Very important to look for students who have not been tested in your LEA and ensure that they're tested in a timely manner. Here's a reiteration of that reclassification reminder on that you also received an email about. That email, I believe, was in January on students who had scored on LPAC overall performance level 4 for the LPAC, summative LPAC, and overall performance level 3 for the summative alternate LPAC, and a reiteration that students can still be evaluated for reclassification before the end of the 2023-24 test administration window. Operationally, Evan mentioned that that need to make sure that that data is updated in CalPads by the 15th of May. He received a single email in January. The state has reiterated those updates over the last 2 months with a February update and a March update that just went to the county. You, of course, also have continuous access to that in your TOMS reports and data. Students eligible for or students' performance in the prior year. And I believe an updated report or an added report, including students with level 4. So check that for your LEA, ensure that everyone is reclassified that should be reclassified. Also affecting your need to test or need to file a status report if a student has been inadvertently tested with the LPAC who has been reclassified in the current year. A significant number of students were reclassified as prompted by that initial January email notification. However, those have clusters of effect, some being affected more than others by the prescience of that note. And so look at your LEA and ensure that that's appropriately followed guidance or appropriately addressed. Especially at the alternate LPAC. Students who take the alternate LPAC, summative LPAC, and the alternate assessments, whether or not that's triggering reclassification when appropriate. Summative LPAC form assignments, there's a note from Wayne from CDE on 23-24 summative LPAC administration with some addition of some forms. And you're going to want to look at your form assignment on the form assignment website. Alternate LPAC form assignments. Just a reminder that it's not necessarily mandatory for a secondary test examiner for the alternate LPAC to hold teaching credential. It's also a rule for the test examiner for the alternate LPACs. But that second scoring is mandatory. It's a mandatory test that must be completed. If you failed to do that in a year in which you were assigned, you will be reassigned in the following year. They'll be analyzing this data to look for discrepancies in ratings between primary and secondary schools, and to prompt additional training when necessary. In terms of that prime slide on determining whether or not students have tested with the initial LPAC and whether they are eligible for and need to test with the initial LPAC based on TVDs and CalPads. There is a report in TOMS available for determining this. It's the initial LPAC, initial alternate LPAC student eligibility report. Please be utilizing that and determining students who need to take that assessment and they need to test that 30-day timeline starts on the date of enrollment in CalPads. Also ensure that students without an ELS status, without a TVD, without an EO, have a TVD or EO in CalPads so that they can trigger inclusion in this report. So those letters about LPAC participation rate, to reiterate information that we previously discussed, is there is a summative LPAC participation rate letter that may be sent to any LAs below 100% completion. Of course, state and federal law require all English learner students to be assessed annually. So that's that 100% completion rate that you're looking for on the LPAC summative. They're going to be sending, hopefully sending this letter for summative assessment in the coming year. That's to be distinguished with LP penalty, and the LP penalty is based on 95% or higher completing testing. This is only an accountability penalty. we are still request 100% of students with the summative LPAC. So that is a state and federal law requiring that.
Oh my God. And I have to cheat sheet. That's
So one of our Los Angeles County LEAs brought forward a concerns about some LPAC, summative LPAC prompts, writing prompts triggering crisis alert response systems. Reports. This has been reiterated by multiple LEAs within Los Angeles County and recognized by other counties as well. CD is looking into these items and determining next steps for continuing its use in future assessments. These items are secure. Test examiners and coordinators should not be talking or writing about them in emails, and err on the side of caution when addressing these. Please do not err on the side of ignoring an alert because it's being prompted by an assessment prompt. Err on the side of caution in terms of student needs. Looking at CAASPP updates, there have been some questions about Vermont and reiterated by Vermont County and reiterated by other counties on student score aggregation. How does the PT count in terms of the overall assessment score? CD addressed this question in generalities in this past indicating, of course, that the CAT, as we know, has more items, has more points than performance tasks, and of course has a greater influence on the total score. But that's a broad answer. And student pattern of responses, difficulty of the performance task, and items in the CAT are also going to affect that. Looking at interim assessments, as anticipated, CAST, California Science Test interim assessments, and LPAC interim assessments. The student score reports, student reports, not the same as the SSRs you see, but those available in SIRS. Those reports that you might use to drive a student meeting or counseling meeting or a discussion with interim assessments, those will be available for CAASPP and LPAC as they're currently available for ELA and math. Those will be available in SIRS here in the summer or early fall 2024. And then Form 2 for the assessments is also scheduled for release, so that anticipated as well. That is continuing to be anticipated for release here in the summer or early fall. Those updates will be made as they're made available, so look out for that email or that update from CDE. That will effectively double the number of interim assessments available for each of those tests. You may have noticed, if you're working to implement CAST or LPAC interim assessments in the past few months, since they became available, that the online guides did not have information on specifically on those assessments and what to do in certain circumstances or how to guide administration. Those have been updated, so good to know that the guide now provides detailed instructions for using those systems specific to CAST and LPAC interims. So those are updated. California Spanish Assessment. So this year, California Spanish Assessment's being expanded with a developed speaking and full rate item, and that's going to become a fully operational in the 24-25 test administration. This affects your LEAs the LEAs that are using that anticipate using the California Spanish Assessment to meet state seal by literacy. The current assessment would have to be supplemented with the those items in order to be used for state seal by literacy. These would make it fully operational for use in state seal by literacy. Of course, California Spanish Assessment does not have an effect on students' completion of the college and career readiness indicator alone, as an AP Spanish assessment might, which might also be released for state seal by literacy. But the cost of a $98 AP assessment contrasts with a $5 apportionment that you get for completion of Spanish assessment. Spanish happens to also be the most utilized language in completing state seal by literacy, and we'll see a call to LEAs for utilizing the California Spanish assessment in the current year, so that data are more reliable in this coming year for the operational assessment. So if you anticipate using the California Spanish assessment for state seal by literacy in the coming operational year, be sure to use it this year so that they can have reliable data to inform that schooling process.
Stephen, a question from the chat. Will the speaking portion be administered one-to-one like the LPAC?
I believe it's recorded, and then that's scored. The recording is scored by a locally. So here in the statement, it says test administrators will listen to each recorded audio response for speaking and score in the teacher hand scoring system. I believe that would be similar to the structure of the AP Spanish. I mean, AP Spanish, of course, would not be scored locally, but students would record individually. I believe you would have to have some way to record them individually, but that would be occurring in isolation of each other. In terms of what that looks like in the administration guidebook, the directions for administration, I don't believe that's I don't know what that looks like in DFAs for Spanish. If you're looking for a target, California Spanish Assessment, of course, is only available in Spanish. So state seal by literacy, targeting Spanish here, the most commonly a completed language for state seal by literacy. If you're looking for a target for assessments to add to your assessments that you potentially use to that state seal by literacy requirement, you can look at CD's website on which is triggering completion of state seal by literacy other than Spanish. French happens to be one of the languages most taken across the state of California. If you look at doorways, what used to be called doorways, it's now high school articulation. Most commonly taken course at the AP level, and LEA across the state is commonly and giving the states a little by literacy for French, so probably an opportunity for assessment there. Yeah. Yeah. Is that okay? On to new coordinator trainings. The SCOE, Sacramento County Office of Education, that runs new coordinator trainings for the state, and drives them out through LEA, local counties. Did a surveys in this past year about the new coordinator trainings. They found that there was consistent feedback that the full-day new coordinator trainings were a bit too long and not recorded. Thus, a new proposed structure for new coordinator trainings in the coming year. You're going to see a plan that includes multiple shorter trainings that have a recording that can be used asynchronously. Evan mentioned this, and it's been discussed amongst our two departments. This may trigger some support for new coordinators that is in addition to this, driven out through LA County. So look out for something about that. If you're a new coordinator, look out for that starting in June with information about the initial LPAC and prep for summative LPAC. Also, CD is trying to, or SCOE is trying to coordinate some of the how-to information. Yeah, you'll note that there was information on how to administer assessments or get data, both from ETS and separately from the state. They're working on how-to hub, compiling all existing how-to informations into one place. And so look out for that as well. I'll open it up for any questions. You're welcome also to send an email to assessment@laco.edu, and I'm happy to follow up with those. Any questions in the chat?
I think we've answered all the questions that have come into the chat. And if some others come up here during Marcus's time, I'm going to keep you in the hot seat, so stay up there in case.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So with that, I think I'll hopefully hand it over to Marcus Betancourt here with ETS, and I'll allow you to take over screen.
You with this, Marcus?
Yeah, hello and good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Got a couple updates and a little presentation. So again, thank you, Evan, and thank you, Stephen, for again utilizing our resources on our sites so flawlessly. It's much appreciated, and thank you again. So I'll just jump right into it, and I'll share screen as well. Okay, go ahead and let me know if everybody can see that okay, and then I'll just start from the beginning.
Yeah, I can see it. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so just a couple things of some housekeeping things. We have all of our CAASPP and LPAC manuals available for everybody on our sites. They're typically located on the home pages and under the resources button, I believe, or the or the administration button, excuse me. So they're all available there, and they should be under the manuals and instructions section, and they're all listed there for both our CAASPP and LPAC manuals and our sites respectively. At any point, you can reach any of the success agents, such as myself or Dina. We both oversee Region 11. We both share that region. So at any point, if you have any questions, you can reach us always via email. Is probably the quickest and preferred method. We're able to monitor that inbox pretty closely and send those replies in a very quick manner. You can always reach us via phone by selecting region 11 when prompted to, based on the number listed there on the screen. Just call that directly, and then when you're prompted to, select 11, region 11, and it'll take you directly to either myself or Dina. If we're both working with other LEA coordinators at the time, please feel free to leave a message. We check our voicemail inboxes frequently as well and try to return all calls as best we can. If you feel like you'd like to chat in as well, it'll start you off with our chat bot, Anita. And if you'd like to reach a representative directly, I think just type agent in the chat and it should take you directly to us as well. And we're happy to assist you there as well. So I'm just going to go over a couple things here. I know I've gone over this a few times, but I always like touching up on it again as well. So just so you know, adding users in TOMS, that can be done two ways. That can be done via manually uploading those users or typing them in and then saving their roles and their accounts. Or if you plan to do that via a file upload, if you have more than a handful of teachers, you're going to have to go through a validation process first, and then you'll be able to upload. So typically what happens is after you use that file upload, you're going to receive an email notification stating number of records accepted, and number of records rejected. If the numbers of records show as accepted for all of them that you have in that file, you'll have to go back to TOMS and make sure that you click on the blue upload button. Again, the verification process does not ensure upload occurs. That's just the validation process that we have in place just to ensure that all of the values on that file are correct. So just be aware of that as well. Now, once those users have been successfully uploaded, what happens is after either the manual creation of those accounts or the file upload and actually has been uploaded, users are going to receive two emails. The first one is going to be from a CA@assessments@do-not-reply, I believe. And it's going to state what role they've been added with. The second email is actually going to contain a link, the secure verification link, which will be highlighted in blue, which is going to be available and active for 30 minutes. So if any of your users are teaching at that time or unable to activate and log in and create their credentials, they can actually go into that second email they received. In the body of the email, it is going to have instructions on selecting the secure verification link again in order for you to receive a new active link immediately. And one thing I do want to check as well, please make sure that the users, if they're not receiving anything in their junk or spam inbox or in their regular inbox, please make sure that the URLs associated with those emails, typically it's CAASPP at do-not-reply.org or CAASPP I believe password at do-not-reply.org, but I believe it's the first one that's going to be associated with those emails. Just make sure that those have been whitelisted in order for them to arrive to the regular inbox so that they're not held in quarantine at the LEA server level. Once the users have received those emails, they select the secure verification link. What's going to happen is they need to make sure that they're logging into TOMS, not to be confused with the TA interface, completely until they reach the landing page of TOMS or the TOMS homepage. That's the only way that the security forms are going to present themselves. If they try to access the TA interface, the security forms are not housed there, so they will not appear for those users. And when they log on to the interface, the only tests that they will see available are interim assessments as opposed to the summative assessments or the summative LPAC assessments based on the role they've been assigned. So please make sure that they are logging in, completing those forms, and allowing at least 30 to 60 minutes after those forms have been completed in order for the appropriate test selection to appear in the TA interface. Now, you can verify at the site level, I believe, and the LEA level coordinator level, verify and confirm all those users have completed their security forms based on the role that you've given them. Security forms and remote administration status report in TOMS, which I'll show you on the next screen, is where you're going to be able to locate that report. So that's what it's going to look like in TOMS when you log in with your LEA or site level role. You're going to see a report under the LEA report section or the site report section that has those security forms and remote administration status report. You're going to be able to download that report. So it's going to look like under the requested report section of TOMS. For the demonstration purposes, I use the demo district for this. And then you'll be able to download the spreadsheet. And then this is what it's going to look like in that spreadsheet specifically. It's going to show you the date and time in which those users have signed those forms. Now, if they haven't signed the forms, the affidavit based on the role they've been given, that's going to indicate no, and it's not going to have a date or time listed there. So that's going to be a pretty clear indication that those users have yet to go into TOMS, log in, and complete the forms. So this next one is preparing students for testing. So this is specific to the demographics. I've had a lot of correspondence with LEAs regarding the upload and updating of their CalPADS files. Please make sure that you are working closely with your LEA CalPADS coordinator to ensure demographic information has been updated, but also uploaded to TOMS. So we have to make sure that those files are being sent to TOMS so that we can integrate that information and populate the data within TOMS itself. Please make sure, as far as how CalPADS is updating, all updates must be made in CalPADS to reflect in TOMS. So it's going to take about 24 hours to 48 hours to the TOMS system itself from CalPADS. And when the student demographic information has been populated and they've been assigned a test, typically it's going to take that same timeline for the actual test delivery system to receive that. So just because they do have a test assigned in TOMS doesn't necessarily indicate that the test delivery system has registered for them, registered that test for them. So please be aware of that as well. Now, the screen you see here, this is specific to just the initial LPAC since it's a ongoing test year-round. In order for students to be automatically assigned and registered for the initial LPAC, make sure that the ELAS status or the English language acquisition status shows as TBD, and that primary language is indicated anything other than English, including ASL as well. If those fields for any reason are blank in those particular fields, what's going to happen is the student will not be assigned a test. So you need to make sure that you're working with your CalPADS administrators to ensure that those fields are populating in CalPADS and that information is being pushed to TOMS. So just some pre-ID label information regarding summative LPAC. I apologize for the commotion outside. It's bleeding into the presentation. So there's going to be 2 production dates, which both of them already passed, in which students are going to be sent pre-ID labels. So the first production date was on January 13th. The second one was on March 10th. So any students that had an SSR and were updated as EL prior to those dates and would have been included in the first production date, and then any students after January 13th but before March 10th that had the EL status and was going to be testing for summative and had an SSR, they're going to be included in those pre-ID labels as well. LEAs, you do not need to pre-order these. These are automatic for when they're created and then when they're sent as well. Any students after that March 10th date, just be aware that there's not going to be a pre-ID label created for the student, and the answers will need to be bubbled in to the K-2 booklets. Just another thing on the summative LPAC that's going on right now. Again, I can't stress this enough because it's something that I come across a lot in working with the LEAs. Please just ensure that the demographic information has been uploaded from CalPADS to TOMS 48 hours prior to testing. We need to make sure that we're doing this, if not on a daily basis, pretty regularly. So, and please note that the updates typically do not take place during weekends. It's usually business hours. So if you update information on a Friday, there's not a guarantee that the information on Monday, since it's not processed during those weekend hours, the student may not be able to test till Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday at the latest. They most likely will not be able to test Monday morning if you made that push of information on a Friday. And then for the summative LPAC, only students that are K-2 will require the answer booklets be sent back, and I'll be touching on base on that a little bit later as well. Grades 3 through 12, they test all online. Now, this is specific to either assigning accommodations or alternate assessments. I just used the alternate initial as an example, but since we're in the summative window, this would be applicable as well. So if the student does require an alternate assessment, they can be assigned to as such, but please make sure that if the student is testing for both CAASPP and LPAC, please make sure to contact and coordinate with your other either CalPADS or LPAC LEA coordinator to ensure that if the student requires an alternate assessment, if they are assigned an alternate assessment for summative LPAC, then they are automatically going to be assigned an alternate assessment for CAASPP. Unfortunately, it's not a pick and choose situation. They are assigned to alternate for all or general assessments for all. And again, if they are testing for both programs, please be aware of that as well, because once they start a summative LPAC and then it's determined that they need the alternate summative LPAC, a STARS incident report will need to be filed in order to reset the test that the student has been administered in error. So just a couple brief points on starting a session. So we have the TA interface, which is available on our TOMS homepage as well, and also in the TOMS system as well once you've logged in. Before starting the test session, and this is something I like to touch on a lot because most of the time students only realize that test settings that should have been applied to their test are not working or functioning when they are actually in the test itself. So this is part of the TA interface that's coming up next regarding the eye or the eyeball icon to verify test settings. As the test examiner or administrator for CAASPP or for LPAC, as they launch that session, they're going to see this before they actually approve the student. So they want to make sure that they're checking the details. As you can see, it shows as default. Sorry, the screenshot's a little bit blurry, but that indicates there hasn't been any specific settings. When settings have been applied to a student, typically you'll see the details show as custom, but they always want to check and make sure that they're selecting the eyeball icon just to verify and make sure that the student has the correct test settings before approving. If the student does not have the correct test settings, they should not approve the student. Again, because the student doesn't want to enter, you want to have the student enter the test itself and then realize the test settings aren't working or functioning as intended. That results in a STARS incident report to have that test reset so that the test settings that were filed are applicable to that test. So as interim assessments are still, I know a lot of LEAs are working on the summative assessments at this point, but interim assessments are still being used prior to those. So just as a note, if administering any interim comprehensive assessments, or ICAs for short, please realize that both the interim test and the performance task of that test must be completed in order to generate score data in SIRS. And then if the ICA has any hand scoring components as well, please make sure that those have been scored and submitted as well so that data can populate in the SIRS. Now, in order for those TAs to view the score data in SIRS, and this goes not just for interim assessments, but for both summative and for the summative LPAC and for the smarter summative, student groups must be created either by the site coordinator or the LEA coordinator in order for them to view those groups. Unfortunately, when TAs or test examiners, log in, they do not have direct access to the students. They are only able to see that score data if they've been added to a student group, and that has been uploaded by either the LEA coordinator or the site coordinator. So just please make sure. And I know some LEAs are working with their SAFE systems as far as an integration feature. I believe we have a list on our CAASPP.org website and LPAC website of the list of current vendors that are doing that integration. So you can definitely check with them if you would like to do integration as opposed to uploading those manually. This is one I wanted to bring up just briefly. I know a lot of you use the completion status reports within TOMS under the report section. Those reports are delayed typically by a 24-hour lapse as far as when a student completes an assessment to when they show is complete. So I've had a lot of correspondences of LEAs reaching out to me saying why are the completion reports this student completed, today, but the completion reports show as they're not completed. And that's because those reports in TOMS are on a 24-hour delay as far as when the student completes to when they actually show as complete in the reports. Now, I want to share this part of it. Some of you do know about this, but I wanted to share it with everybody. So there's a completion status section, which allows you to access the TIDE system under the link section of TOMS. I have a couple screenshots to illustrate that as well. So when you're in TOMS, you'll simply go under the link section and select completion status. It'll take you to this page. It's going to be notated by a green screen, and it's going to show administering tests. Now, there are two features I use on a daily basis as well, but plan and manage testing and search by SSID. So plan and manage testing allows you to search by using various filters, and then it allows you to either generate a table on the actual screen itself or download a spreadsheet. So this is what the plan and manage testing features look like here. You'll be able to select your district, the school site. You can also get as refined as the student's first name, their SSID, and so forth. You can choose the assessment. This just happens to default to Smarter ICA. Now, it's not going to show the prior administration years, I believe. It's only going to show for this 23-24 year. And if you're looking for a specific test name, you can also use the drop-down filter as well, located on the right, to actually hone in on that particular test that you're wanting to find out if a student has completed as far as their completion reports. And then the last section where it says get specific, those drop-downs change and those radio buttons change on what you're looking at. So typically it defaults to students who have completed any, but those drop-downs do change. You can change between have or have not, completed or started. And then if it's in regards to interim assessments, you'll actually have any listed there, or if it's an ICA, you'll have opportunities 1, 2, and 3 listed in that drop-down. The second radio button, you can choose by students who have any opportunity or their first opportunity or second or so forth. And then also their status, whether that be reported, paused, expired, anything like that. The third one allows you to see up to 20 SSIDs at a time. The fourth one shows students whose current opportunity will expire in number of days, depending on which test it was given. So you'll be able to select in, and then I believe the other one is going to be, I'm not sure, this is a screenshot I'm trying to recall, but students who have a current opportunity expired in either 45 days or 15 days based on whether it's a computer adaptive or a performance task. And then you can get very specific in the search filters for students who have the most recent. You can plug in the session ID there, and then you can look between the specific dates. I believe it's 15 days that you can look between. It's not going to allow you to go any further than 15 days. Now, this is the other one that I was mentioning as well a couple pages ago, the search by SSID feature. So you can search multiple student SSIDs here, and what's going to happen is when you generate the report, it's going to show a table that is actually listed below. And if the students have any outstanding tests that either are in a pause status, reported, or expired, it's going to appear on a table below. Fortunately, I wasn't able to grab a screenshot of that, but when you click on generate report and based on the SSIDs that you enter, it's going to show that below the generate report section. So definitely feel free to use these, as these are much more real time. I believe it's up to 30 minutes and up to an hour after a student actually completes the test, as opposed to the reports in TOMS. So this is a much faster and much more real time way to see completion for students. So just a couple reminders on the CAASPP side, since a lot of the windows are opening up. Again, I know I put this, I sound like a broken record, but I definitely want to make sure that please make sure that you're updating all the student demographic information, and that's being done at least a minimum of 24 to 48 hours prior to testing the student. Just want to make sure that's being done so that the student tests register, and then when they access the test, they're not receiving any error messages such as no test available or anything like that. Now, this is a little bit of a new one. So this takes the student test settings is not as delayed as it was in past administration years. Typically, when test settings are either uploaded or they're manually selected and saved, they typically take about 2 to 4 hours after the coordinators assign those settings in TOMS to reach the test delivery system. So it's a little bit faster than previous administration years. We have some reminders for the Summit of LPAC currently ongoing. So the window is going to be February 1st again through May 31st. Supplemental orders for kindergarten through second grade material can still be placed at this time, but please note that it's going to take about 10 to 14 business days to arrive once the order has been placed. So just keep that timeline in mind when you're ordering supplemental orders as well. And then finally, for the K through 2 Summative Answer booklets, Summative LPAC answer books, they must be scheduled by June 14th in order to be scored by ETS. It can't be any later than that date in order for our scoring and shipping to receive. So please make sure that they're scheduled for pickup at least by June 14th. Any other later date than that, there's no guarantee that those booklets will be scored. To check the chat as well, but any questions?
Marcus, we had a few questions, kind of not too many, but starting off, we had one. Are students allowed to use Bluetooth mics for CAASPP?
That's a great question. So as far as, let me just stop sharing the screen here. I was able to actually get some information regarding Bluetooth information. Let me see if I can find that here. Give me just a brief moment. So Bluetooth devices, so this goes not just for, excuse me, earbuds or earpods, anything like that. Bluetooth devices are supported. Wired headphones should be used because of potential issues with pairing those Bluetooth devices in the same testing location. So please note that the test administrator or examiner would want to confirm that a student who uses either Bluetooth hearing aids or a Bluetooth, a mouse or a microphone, anything like that, is connected only to the testing device that is running the secure browser. So there's not any specific verbiage on if it's allowed, as far as it is allowed, but if it's prohibited or anything like that, it is allowed, but they want to make sure that they are pairing those Bluetooth devices with the device that is running the secure browser only, no other devices.
And another question, Marcus, was when will student labels for the K through second LPAC summative LPAC writing booklets be received?
So those two dates again, there is, I can see if you want to reach out to me directly, whoever had that question, I can see if I can get any tracking information regarding those labels, because we are sent that tracking information as well. So please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll see if I can get any tracking information for you on that.
Let me check here. If, let's see, last one I see here. If students need the Spanish text-to-speech designated support map, do they need stacked translations assigned as well? Does the text-to-speech need to be stacked translations to work?
I don't believe so. I can definitely double check, but I don't believe that both of those need to be assigned at the same time, because they actually end up being too much for the student to actually have both of those. And they might actually conflict in the actual live testing environment, but I'll double check as well.
I think the last question for you is not necessarily a question, more like an observation here.
Sure.
But there were upticks. Were updates not done over weekends? Is the technology used to complete this task turned off on Friday and turned back on Monday morning?
So as far as updates not being done over weekends, it's because it depends on when the TOMS team, because weekend hours aren't typically, as far as the TOMS team receiving those CalPads updates, they're not live at this point. So for example, if you do an update on a Friday, we're not going to receive that information from your CalPads update, I believe, not until late want to say very late Sunday. It depends on the time difference between, but typically the business hours is what we want to stick to because there's not any guarantee. Again, we're not receiving those at least until Monday so that we can actually upload those. So that's why I want to stick to the business hours.
All right, I don't see anything else in the chat right now.
All right, if you have any questions, this would be your last chance. I'm going to hand it over to Evan to close us out.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Dr. DJ, Dr. W. Thanks everybody who came back, pulls up, and try to get follow-up information out to you as quickly as possible.